KY, channel. I mean, it's one of those. But I thought that was very nice that people. He said, yeah, somebody told somebody who told somebody.
My goodness.
Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Is the Anti-Defamation League the most extremist group in the United States, as one other group would have you believe? Or is it an organization that's trying to keep hate from seeping deeper into our society? With me this week on Consider This, here at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, in front of the Fireside Pit and Student Center's Bob Wolfson. Thanks for joining us. You've got kind of a lot, always have a lot on your plate. But lately, with the release of the Mel Gibson movie coming up next week on Ash Wednesday, and this continued sort of sporadic hate flyers being distributed, you're
busy.
And just the regular stuff you do. I wonder sometimes if people realize that the Anti-Defamation League, which was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just assuming from my historical perspective that it was originally started to keep people from defaming Jews.
Well, we were formed in 1913, over
Right.
90 years ago. We had two goals then, and they remain the goals of the organization now. One is to protect the Jewish community, so we're a self-defense agency for the Jewish community, but it's to secure justice for all people alike as the second part of that goal.
So that's been part of that from the beginning.
From the very beginning, and because our founders understood over 90 years ago that if you only fight for your own protection, there's some other group that's being defamed or damaged or attacked, that it's only a matter of time before you too become part of that deal. So it's in our own self-interest.
Sort of like if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Kind of like that.
Kind of like that. Well, let's talk about the big, I think, the blockbuster zip buzz thing this week, and that's on every news media outlet. Mm-hmm. So why shouldn't we be part of the fray?
You bet.
Is the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of the Christ, and
Sure.
the concern of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, that it will. Is your concern creating anti-Semitism, advancing anti-Semitism? What is the concern?
Well, the first thing is someday after this is all over, we're going to go back and do an interesting study on how the media affects the popular culture and how the popular culture affects the media.
Right.
It's a
Chicken
very,
egg, dog
very
chasing the tail.
interesting story. I've heard more times in the last 3 days that ADL says that Mel Gibson is anti-Semitic, and of course we've never said that.
No, you haven't.
What we've said is that Mel Gibson is making a movie based on all four Gospels, which by definition he has to pick and choose between because the Gospel accounts don't all agree with one another.
No.
And since the Bible, both New Testament and 5 books of Moses, are scanty in detail, when you actually go to filming something, you have to fill in a lot of the blanks. How many people there are in a crowd, what constitutes a mob, what are they actually saying?
How big is a burning bush in the Old
How big is a
Testament?
burning bush, right. It could be, different visions for different artistic views. The problem with Mr. Gibson was, from the very beginning, he said that his movie was going to be historically and biblically accurate, which raised all kinds of red flags. We've been dealing with passion plays for over 1,000 years.
The European ones are the Oberammergau being one of the most famous.
Oberammergau, Stone Mountain, Ozarks, and practically half of the churches in the state of Nebraska every year. People have been doing these for years. The problem is that Mr. Gibson has a particular theological point of view, and he's embedding his theology in the choices that he's making about the film. In particular, one of those troublesome areas is his difference as a traditionalist Catholic from the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has been at the forefront of changing its traditional teachings after Vatican II to accommodate for what they learned as a result of the Holocaust. And that was that Jews should be taught, it should be taught to all Christians and to Jews and to the community, that Jews are not collectively responsible for the deicide, the so-called death of God, and that from a certain point of view religiously, it isn't even the point of the Christian story. So when Gibson chooses to ignore those developments of theology, those developments of Christian teaching, and go back to a day where he paints the Jews as the primary movers and responsible parties for the death of Jesus, it gives us cause for concern.
He picks a very limited amount of time.
12 hours.
12 hours. And so you're seeing what his vision is of the compilation of those four Gospels in all the, as I understand what he's saying from listening to him and reading accounts about what he said, in all the, crucifixions aren't, real for the faint of heart.
Right.
And he's trying to show it what he believes was its, how awful it must have been.
Right.
And the fact that it is very graphic and very violent, and then you have the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Sanhedrin, and the sort of the big guys at the time,
Right.
Appearing to call the shots. The juxtaposition of those two in this short amount of time seems like that's kind of all there was. And Caesar was just kind of, I wash my hands.
Well, the first idea is preposterous, that the Sanhedrin, first of all, not all gospel accounts talk about the trial in the same way. They're different. So he chose the one about the Sanhedrin. Secondly, the idea of Pontius Pilate taking orders from Caiaphas is historically the most ridiculous thing that's ever been proposed. Aside from little things
Maybe
like...
Annas, but not Caiaphas. I'm just kidding.
Aside from little things like the fact that the language of the day was not Latin, it was Greek and Aramaic, it wasn't, the little things that have to do with the historicity of the story, but obviously those are controversial areas. Those are areas that are different. The main issue is that if the movie causes people, Christians and Jews and others, to read more, study more, talk more about the problems with the gospel, their relationship to the history of anti-Semitism, the meaning in various traditional faiths of how they view what Christ's passion was about, if it results in that, that'll be good. If it results in even a small number of people revisiting the old screed against Jews that we were responsible for the death of Jesus, that means that I, Bob Wolfson, as a member of the Jewish faith, am personally responsible for the death of Jesus, collectively with my brother and sister Jews. That idea is extremely dangerous. When it's done in an art form, not in a theology class, that is possible and does happen. In fact, we have 2,000 years of history to demonstrate that it did happen.
Right.
So people should not discount our concerns as silly, and people should not forget that we respect that the Passion play, that the Passion narrative is the central and most important story of Christians. We do respect that.
Without the Passion and the resurrection, then there wouldn't be
story.
a lot of Christians around.
It's the whole deal.
Mel Gibson apparently took out a very small, at least the words across the screen, since it's in Latin and Aramaic. There's
His blood be upon
subtitles.
us and upon our children.
Right.
Matthew.
Even though I guess the actual words can be heard
In Aramaic.
very, very slow.
Right.
He took that out, and I heard that he did it because of focus groups. But he did take that out. For whatever reason he did, he must have felt something wasn't right.
Well, most Christian traditions teach today that the people that were responsible for the death of Jesus was humanity. That the theology of Christianity teaches everyone is responsible for the death of Jesus. That's the whole point.
Well,
and so to the extent that verse points people towards the Jews, the audiences didn't understand it. And we certainly were not in favor of it. Those verses do not appear in the other three Gospels.
Correct.
And we'll leave it to New Testament scholars to debate what was said, what wasn't said, what was the context. But it's helpful to understand when the New Testament was written, why these books were written, and who the audiences were. It was primarily the Jews and the Romans. The Romans were still in power.
And they weren't physically recorded right away.
No.
Either.
Over a course of years.
Right. It's interesting. I was raised in the Catholic Church pre-Vatican and post-Vatican.
Sure.
And then maybe my subsequent education and classes I took, I always look back on it as that, Jesus historically rocked the boat of a political, Jews, Romans, political situation of the time.
Sure.
And that things that are run politically often get out of hand.
Right.
I mean, the Crusades. The Crusades were done in the name of a right
Jesus.
thing.
Yeah.
But there was awful stuff that happened
Sure.
in the name of the Crusades. So it's just human frailties.
We're not saying that Christianity, by definition, causes anti-Semitism.
Right,
We're
right.
saying that there are people who, under the flag of Christianity, have done bad things to our community. We would hate, because we failed to stand up and say, beware, that would happen again.
I guess I can't believe after the Holocaust and everything, I do, because I know it's true, that there's still people that say that the Holocaust didn't happen. There's still people.
His father gave an interview yesterday that
Mel
said
Gibson's
that.
father is
different story.
extreme
Sure.
himself apparently.
Right.
But that it's still, if we can ever prove anything, maybe the Gospels, if you want to talk about proving stuff, it was written, passed on, written down. Mm-hmm. We all believe that this happened. We know that historically Jesus the Christ lived. But I have much more faith, in a sense, because I saw the concentration camps.
Mm-hmm.
I saw things. It wasn't a ruse. It wasn't written down
Right.
80 million years later, or 2,000 years later, or 100 years later. I guess I find total incongruity
Yeah, I
in
think
that
one
concept.
of the big issues for us is that people seem to miss the point that there are people in reaction to this moment in history that use the moment of time and the conflict to perpetrate their own agenda. 2 nights ago in St. Louis, Missouri, a synagogue had their front sign, all of the letters taken down, and somebody put up "Christ is King." Now, it wasn't violent, it wasn't threatening, but it pits people against each other. We've been working for years trying to bring various religious groups, particularly Jews and Christians, to the table together, to work on common concerns, to deal with our conflicts with one another, to talk through our problems. This is not necessarily a good way to do it, taking a pylon sign and changing it. So those sorts of people we would decry, and the sorts of people that are saying, well, listen, this is what it says. What do you think? How do you study? Go to your pastor, go to your minister, read more, study more.
Talk amongst
yourselves, study. It's great. That's good.
It seems that it's in the cards that one way or the other, just because of the controversy, the talk, the fact that it's Mel Gibson and some of the things he said, the fact that he has a father that's pretty extreme, this looks like it's going to be a blockbuster.
Oh, I think it's unlikely that it won't be.
Right, and so sometimes people even read into that because this is supposed to be historically accurate. And
Well, that's a problem.
that
It is- it
exists.
is
The
for
fact
sure
that
not
it's
historically
successful. The fact that it's successful equates with it. So many people must have thought it was, verbatim to whatever happened.
That has to do with people's willingness to take the time to study, to question the different accounts, and one of our concerns is that that's a lot of work for most people. It's much easier to go into a theater, plop your rear end down, and watch. And
Although that may
however
be
you
a hard
react-
movie to watch.
Oh, it'll be extremely hard to watch. I'm not looking forward to watching it. And every report that I've heard, including ministers, priests, people that have seen it, say that it's excruciating. I'm not looking forward to that.
I'm not either. Let's move to another aspect of what we're seeing happen in our own community.
Sure.
We haven't seen the name taken off a synagogue or a temple
Thank God.
and something replaced. But we have seen a continued sporadic effort on the part of a national organization called the National Alliance
Sure.
to spread hate flyers
Right here in
about
River
Omaha.
City.
Yeah, in various configurations. The most recent being the one around Valentine's Day that said "Love your race." Earlier ones inferred, as I understand, maybe you can, because you've seen them and you keep track of them, that blacks should leave Omaha, or something. To that effect.
It was saying that violent crime is a black thing. The flyer actually said,
And therefore-
in quotations, black thing, and talked about Officer Pratt and Rucker and lists statistics, and then said, we as whites can do something about it. Doesn't exactly say we're going to
Doesn't
chase
imply
blacks
what?
out, but it said we in the white community can do something about this, and then leaves it to the reader to conclude
To decide what
you
their
want.
action
Right.
should be. the National Alliance says that it really is an organization just trying to deal with the problems that white people face. That's
Right.
their party line, so to
If
say.
I was their PR director, I'd say the same thing. But first of all, you can't talk to one of the local people because they want only their most sophisticated racists to be talking to the media. So when you talk as a media person to the National Alliance, you get a regional coordinator in Denver, Colorado.
If you
not a
can
lo-
get
If
them.
you can get them, you get a regional coordinator in Denver. Number two, all you have to do to know who these people are is read their websites. It's clear. They are white supremacists, white separatists, neo-Nazis who want to advocate that blacks and people of color and Jews are less high on the totem pole of life than white Aryans, and that their eventual goal is to have a completely white separate country in the northwest of the United States, completely devoid of anybody who's not racially sensitive, who they consider lost, and anybody who is a black, a Mexican, of mixed race, Jewish, anything different than what they perceive as pure. That's their goal.
Am I silly to think that I don't want to believe that this is going on in my community and that I am not like that, and that therefore, and if I raise my children, you know, not to be like that, that we're safe from hate?
Look, it's a great example of what responsibilities there are. If you are a responsible person raising your children in positive ways, certainly you don't have anything to worry about. But these folks don't go away because we want them to go away. So you have to teach anew your children, your neighbors, yourself about who they are, about what it means, what a challenge it is. And then we have to stand up and say, not here.
Okay, but how many of these folks do you think, I mean, we've had in the last year about four flyers come out at 4 different times. And in fact, I think a couple of the National Alliance people were at a meeting you held,
Yes, they were.
community
First
meeting.
time in the United States they attended a public meeting.
And they didn't say anything.
No.
They did flyer the cars
Yes, they did.
at the OPS building. How, are these people coming in as agitators, or they have a real following here?
They're not agitators, they're organizers. They're,
Okay,
they're
organizers,
searching
whatever.
for that few people that are going to be holding the same kind of racist
Okay,
ideas that they hold.
So are there a few people in Omaha like that? I mean,
Sure.
no, I mean as little as a few. Or do you think there's more than
Well,
a
look,
few?
with the internet, with cheap duplication of flyers, all it takes is a few people to upset a lot of folks.
Well, who's that fellow in Lincoln that was?
Gerhard Lauk. Gerhard Lauk's the largest
The-
publisher of neo-Nazi literature in the world, out of his mother's basement in Lincoln, Nebraska. You don't need a lot of money or a lot of people to create a lot of heat. If I counted up the number of minutes and column space that have been devoted to the National Alliance and their 4 flyers, and you think about how difficult that was, it's relatively easy to do.
To even create that much?
No big deal. Any competent 8-year-old could go on the computer and create the same thing they're doing. That means that they can create a huge amount of publicity for a little amount of effort. That's not good news.
Is it good, and you even have the situation with the Mel Gibson movie, that the more publicity, I mean, it is good or bad? I mean,
But in a way, we cut on both sides of that question,
Right.
because if without publicity, people can't become informed. And part of the media's responsibility and our responsibility is to hold up signs and say, become educated, become informed about these issues. We don't want to, by our silence, have issues turn into something greater than they should have been if we had just spoken up. On the
well,
other
we
hand,
know what history shows about not
we're not going to
speaking
repeat
up.
that. We're not going to repeat that silence. But the danger of that is sometimes you draw attention to people when they don't deserve it. Now, in Denver, for example, they've had 50 or 60 distributions of these flyers, and now the media, they put one line, the National Alliance did it again. I mean, it's not, it doesn't even make it on the evening news. Now, that's not because the news has changed its mind about them.
No,
it's because they've realized that part of the gig is that these people are trying to get attention, and they're not going to give it to them anymore. If something happened that it was really newsworthy, they would do something.
Well, when it began, it was
it was
newsworthy.
newsworthy. The bad news is that the more frustrated these people become at their lack of news media, the higher their ratcheting up of their attention-getting behaviors has to be. So in a way, our lack of attention to them may create a situation where they become more and more active, not less active.
Or just the constant mentioning of the name and their mission would get more people on a website and more people on their computers.
That's exactly right.
You know, we had a situation in Nebraska, and I lose track of time. I've been here all my life. I want to say 15 years ago or so in Rouleau, Nebraska,
Sure.
where we had
Michael Ryan,
who was a survivalist type. I don't know if he was a white supremacist, although I understand that he was from accounts that were told to me.
Hated women too.
He believed in that whole mentality of an underground society where you don't have driver's licenses, you don't register births, so we saw that sort of mentality can exist in a small pocket, where I'm sure very good people live around that area.
Sure.
So it's not unbelievable to think that it could happen in Nebraska, and it may be happening now in some other small pocket here.
More recent cases. Tina Brandon was killed.
That's true.
We had Kenyatta Bush that was killed, and the guy had to be let go. I mean, we have very clear cases of bias-motivated issues that have happened in our community. Our community is not free from these problems. On the other hand, that's not what the average person is. The problem is that if the average person listens to this stuff and begins to believe that it has validity, that's the problem. It isn't that there's extremists. There will always be extremists of one kind or another. It's what do most of us believe and what kind of a society do most of us work at.
You drink this while I ask you the next question.
Okay.
So the ADL is always in a, no, I won't say always, but it seems often that we call Bob, who is executive director of the Great Plains region, and other people call other executive directors of regions when things like this happen. Mm-hmm. I know that you are much more proactive in your education in the schools and all kinds of things,
Sure.
But do you think that people get the idea, maybe just because of what they see in the news, that you're always reacting to something?
Look, I mean, if the answer is that we're the 911 people call when things happen involving hate, we're not unhappy with that.
Right.
Because we want to be informed about what's going on in our community so that we can hold up a sign if we need to do better. But the proactive stuff is the more fun stuff because you're not running around chasing your tail. You're not reacting to things. But both sides of that coin are part of what we have to have.
I understand that you are delving into or putting together an effort, an anti-hate campaign statewide. How do you say we're going to go statewide with an anti-hate campaign? Is it hard to kind of get a handle on this, or has
Sure.
it been done in other states of how to do this best?
It's been done in other states, and it is a challenge because one of the things that people need to be able to do is to associate themselves, their families, and their communities with the ideas of speaking out against these groups without requiring too terribly much of us. We're all busy, we all have lives, we all have homes, we all have churches, synagogues, and mosques that we go to, and our lives are enormously busy. So we're trying to craft a community-wide campaign that would allow people to be part of it without having to be over the top involved with it, and then at the same time offer opportunities for those people that want to do more. That's sort of a challenge, and we hope soon be ready to announce those kinds of efforts where people can join in and add their voices to sending a message to the whole community that we want this to be a better community than it is.
Does the ADL have materials? I mean, I've been to their website a number of times over the years for families to use, churches to use,
sure.
how hate can grow
Easily.
very easily,
Yeah.
and bias and prejudice.
Sure.
And I'm not talking, that somebody's always got to be better than somebody else, and then when you get to that, then someone's inferior to somebody else,
Sure.
and that can start with the kid next door.
Sure. We have a whole division of our work that's the educational division. If you go to our website, adl.org, click on education, there's all kinds of things, lesson plans, guides, articles to read that'll inform you of these issues. Those things are very helpful in this sort of an area so that people don't feel like they have no resources.
The interesting thing in the last couple flyer distributions in Omaha, the TV stations, I've read the newspaper, did find people that were willing to go on camera who had received these in their yard or on their car or whatever, and spoke pretty pretty articulately about why they're speaking out, why they weren't afraid to come forward and have their face on the camera. And I think that speaks, to our community, because I'm sure there are communities where they're afraid to, depending on what the makeup is hate versus non-hate. And
I think we have a lot to be proud of in Omaha. I think sometimes there are people who feel that we have a harder time looking at some of the deeper issues of racism, institutionalized racism, bigotry, that is sort of the common problem that many people in America have, and we're not free from that kind of a problem in Omaha.
And we don't all agree what are the elements of institutional racism, because if you look at it one way and I look at it another way.
On the other hand, when somebody comes into our face and says, we're Nazis and we want to be here, I think we'll find a lot of people being willing to stand up and shout at the top of their rooftops, we don't want this in our communities. The good news is that we have lots of people in the community. We hope and continue to pray that people will step forward and say those things. That doesn't mean we're bigotry free. Working on our own individual, collective problems of bias and bigotry and stereotyping is really ultimately the only way you make your community a better place in the long run. So I want to give us high marks for our reaction and say that we have some distance to go to really drive that deep into our culture and into our society so that everyone feels a part of the American story.
Where does political correctness and sometimes people feeling that we've just overreacted in the form of political correctness have a negative, a reverse effect? I'm just tired of this political correct. I mean, we're spending more time bending over backwards in our institutions, such as a university here, and I'm not saying that what they're doing isn't right, but you know what I mean? There's a lot of people are just kind of tired of having to think all the time about being politically correct.
Well,
is that the same as being non-biased? I don't know.
I don't think it is. I mean, I think that if you and I disagree on an issue involving the issues of bigotry and bias, that's a discussion that we can have and is not about political correctness. If you're self-censoring your language that is hurtful to other people, that's also not political correctness.
That's just a good...
That's just polite social behavior. I mean, if you grew up being able to say anything and anything you wanted about women, and today you are more sensitive about the language you use, including the B word and all kinds of other words that when I was a kid men used all the time, that's not political correctness, that's correct sensitivity.
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but my mother, who has gone from this earth, would be happy if we were all a little nicer.
Me too.
For the right reasons.
Me too.
I do want to remind people that your website, which we've shown on this show and is on our website, is adl.org. It's pretty easy to find. Bob, I want to thank you for coming back with us. I did make an effort to get a hold of National Alliance people to get some sort of statement, and they did not return my calls. Thank you very much, Bob Wolfson, and thank you for joining us on Consider This.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.